Hello and welcome to this tutorial in which I will be showing you how I painted Necron Immortal. This tutorial is mainly on popular request because I've gotten a lot of questions about how I painted my grip tech, especially certain parts. As usual, I start off with a base coat of Chaos Black through a rattle can, and then through the airbrush I paint all the armor panels and the upper legs of the model using burnt umber. When the burnt umber is dry, I use chipping medium again through an airbrush. The batch I have at the moment looks a bit splattery, but the end result is still okay. So as you can see here, the model is nice and shiny due to the chipping medium. So once that's dry, I'm going to cover those parts using dark earth, and this will be the deeper initial shadow for the armor panels. The bottom side of the shoulder panels isn't that big of a deal if you don't completely cover them with this color of paint. It's perfectly fine if some burnt umber keeps showing in that position. Same goes for the entire arm socket when we're going to paint that metal later on anyway. Then as a very rough highlight, again through the airbrush, I apply a coat of light brown to the shoulder blades and all the other armor panels. Once that has been applied and has dried for a bit, I use bone white and I reinforce the previous highlight. Basically going towards the most raised and outer sides of the model, just to get it on there. Just a little bit of coverage will do the trick. To be able to keep working in a pleasant manner with chipping medium, I do recommend to keep going. Don't stop between these layers. Just keep on going so that the chipping medium will react easily. If you leave it like the way it is right now for a couple of days, it's going to be harder to chip the model. Next up I use just water and I soak the model in it. Once it has soaked for like a couple of seconds, I use a brush with hard bristles and I start chipping the paint off, and the burnt umber nicely shows up again in some areas. If you don't trust yourself, if you're afraid to do it in a too rough of a manner, just apply a coat of matte varnish before you apply the chipping medium, and that way the chances of you going straight through the paint to the plastic of the model will be a lot smaller. Then using bone white, I'm going to edge highlight the model, at least the armor panels on the model, and also I'm going to apply a highlight to the bottom of all the chips we just created. Once all of that has been done, I take metallic black and I carefully start blocking in all the metallic areas. I make sure I don't mess up the armor panels I've just been painting in a bone color. And it's wise to leave the model after the highlights just to dry, or at least after the chipping to dry for a while, so that all the water has been nicely vaporized and is gone. So with the metallic black in place, I go to non-oil to darken it up to create some shadows, and I just wash it over all the metallic parts. There's no science to this, you can just really just blab it on there. I'm going to dry brush the model after this, so if it's a bit heavy, that's perfectly fine. When the non-oil is dry, I take gunmetal, and as I just said before, I'm going to dry brush all the metallic parts. Again, I make sure I don't hit the bone parts. We don't want any metallic streaks on there, so this does take a little bit of care. but it shouldn't be that hard, and in case you don't trust yourself, use a small brush. Then when that's fully dried, I use AK Interactive Rust Streaks, and I mix that with white spirit to get this consistency of a mixture, and then take some pure white spirit in another cup. I just wash the entire model with the first mixture, as you can see right here. And once I've applied all of that to the entire model, take a little bit of the pure white spirit to clean up the armor panels a bit. Do this in a well ventilated area. This stuff smells, and you might end up with a headache if you do this in a closed room. In case it's not bright enough when it's dry after roughly 24 hours, it's not bright enough on the armor panels, you can take some pure white spirit again and just reactivate the mixture to wash it off a bit. So I went back to the gunmetal and dry brushed the metallic parts again. So now we have the more rusty parts in the shadows. And then using silver, I went over the most raised and visible areas to get more depth into the armor. Now we're finished with the metal parts. We're going to move on to the golden parts, and I take Viking gold and I just block in this color on all the parts that I decided needed to be gold. Clearly you can do this on any random part you like to be gold. Once that has been applied, I move to Airbrush Earthshade, and I wash all these golden parts using this wash. This shade, get a nice dark tone on it and a good shading effect. And once that's dry, I am going to highlight all the golden parts using Victorian brass. The Victorian brass is a nice warm gold color, but it's not too vibrant, not too gold-like. It's a bit darker. Well, the name says it already. It's moving towards brass, and that gives, together with the more worn and weathered look, just looks a bit better than when I would have gone for, let's say, golden dwarven gold, which is a more vibrant gold. When the Victorian brass has been applied, I'm going to take silver and I edge highlight all those golden parts. And just keep it simple. I do this basically by looking top down on the model, and the parts that I can see, they will get a highlight. If I can't see it, I won't highlight it. And then I use Seraphim Sepia and I wash all these golden parts. This will help turn the silver we just applied into a more gold-like color, and will tie the colors nicely together. Next I used pale blue gray and I painted the faceplate of the Necron with it. I do this for all my Necrons. I like the look of the nice white face on the dark and worn background of the rest of the model. If you don't want that, you can just leave that a metal color, or you could make it a bone color if you want to. Next, using non-oil, I wash the recesses on the faceplate. I don't do the eyes or the eye sockets because we're gonna paint that in a different color later on anyway. Whilst the non-oil was drying, I took anthracite gray and I decided to block in the base quickly, since I wasn't going to be painting near the base near the basing material anyway. anymore. I thought this is a nice moment, so it just gets time to dry. I then made a mixture of 1 part pale blue gray and 1 part white, and I use this as a highlight for the faceplate. I make sure the black areas we just washed stay nice and dark, and I leave some pale blue gray visible in the other recesses as well. Next, I make a mixture of 1 part pale blue gray with 3 parts white, and I'm going to build this color up a bit further, reinforcing the highlight over the edges. And these can be pretty thick edges because we're going to apply another highlight later on. Next, pure white has been used to finish the faceplate off. Again, by applying highlights, thinner lines than the previous ones, just reinforcing them towards the outside and the most raised areas on the model. Next, I moved to Warlord Purple and I painted the eyes and the eye sockets with this. I did this straight after the white, so that I still have some white on my palette left, in case I screwed up, so I could clean it up with a little bit of white again. Then I took that white and I used this to paint in the actual eyes. Since white wouldn't look good next to the white helmet, I used squid pink and I painted the white parts with this color. The squid pink shows up way better on a white surface than on the Warlord Purple surface, therefore the white has been applied in between. In the meantime, the base was dry, so I could dry brush it using Wolf Gray. And that, apart from some other basing material like Tuft, I finished up the base already. As you can see, I keep it a little bit darker around the model, so that it appears that the model is casting a shadow on the base as well. Then I went to anthracite gray, and I was going to paint the gray parts on the model, and I just blocked all this in. As far as the cables go, they will be 2 colors later on, but at this stage I just painted it all anthracite gray, just because easier. There's no need to be super precise right now, as you can see here. Once that coat of anthracite gray has completely dried, I wash it using non-oil. For painting these Necrons, non-oil seemed to be kinda like my friend. Then I made a mixture of 4 parts anthracite gray and 1 part white, and I apply rough highlights to all these parts. I just washed and painted. The only exception to this is now the wires that I plan on painting purple later on. I just don't touch them anymore until I'm going to paint them purple. In case you're wondering, there's a little red part showing on the belly of the model. I couldn't get that on video, on camera for this model, but I'll put up a card in the end of the video when the turntable thingy is going on, and where I paint a cryptech, and in that video I do explain how I painted that part. So with that next, well, basically first real highlight on the gray parts in place, I move on by making by basically adding 2 parts white to the mixture, getting it to a 4-to-3 mixture, 4 parts anthracite gray and 3 parts white. And I'm going to reinforce this highlight in a thinner line. As you can see here, I make sure the previous layer stays a little bit visible, and I paint towards the top of the model in case of the wires. And on the gun, I use it as a rough edge highlight. I'm not super precise with this, it's not really needed for this stage. Just make sure it's basically on there, it's showing, and it doesn't cover up the previous layer completely, and you're good. And then for the final layer, I add 2 parts white to the mixture, and I apply this as a thin edge highlight. And for these thick wires, cables, just stay on the upper side of them, if possible. If they go in a curve, like on the back, the vertical part I'll paint a line in the middle, and then in the flow of the corner I'll move towards the top for the horizontal part, as you can see right here, so that the highlight is on the most visible part basically. It's not the most logical part, but well, logic and wargaming, especially Warhammer, don't really seem to go together, so it doesn't really matter. The most important part is basically that something is happening to the part. With that color in place, we're pretty good on our way right now. I use black and I paint in this this orb-like thing. At least in my mind, it's an orb-like thing. And I paint in the wires that I'm gonna paint purple, pink, whatever you want to call it. And I just block those parts in. I am careful not to hit the other wires, but it shouldn't be that big of a problem. I also make sure I stay away from the actual shadow, so that the non-oil I've put in there stays a little bit visible, and we don't screw that effect up. I then make a mixture of 1 part hex leech and 3 parts warlord purple, and I'm going to apply this as a highlight. As for the orb and gems, I paint in the same way for the Necrons. I stay on the bottom part of the orb / gem. This model unfortunately doesn't have gems, so I couldn't show that. And as for these wires, in general, I go for this first layer. Everything I can see when I just look at the model, when I turn it around in front of me, I'll paint purple, so that the really black is only on the not visible parts. Next, I add 3 parts warlord purple to the mixture, making it a 1 part hex leech and 6 parts warlord purple mixture, and I start reinforcing this color just like I did the other wires. And as far as the gem or the orb goes, I work a little bit further towards the bottom of it. The principle for the cables just is the same as with the gray cables. The same non-logic / logic applies to those parts. Next, I added 3 more parts warlord purple to the mixture. So now the mixture is 1 part hex leech and 9 parts warlord purple, and I just reinforce it again. I'm just trying to get these colors more vibrant, so that when you look at the model, they are visible from far away. The purple in this model basically is the color that will draw the attention towards the army / models. Next, I make a mixture of 3 parts warlord purple and 1 part white, and again I start reinforcing it, and as you can see, the color now is turning pretty pink, but that's okay. And for the orb, once again I keep moving towards the bottom. It's basically the highlighted area normally is the top, but I work towards the bottom. And then I add 2 parts white to the mixture. So if you're gonna make a new one, it's just 1-to-1, 1 part warlord purple, 1 part white basically. Except for this mixture is 3-to-3 because I just keep working. And again, I reinforce it on the cables. I stay on the top. Same principle as for the gray cables. I just put it on the table, look top down, see what I need to paint, and that is the area that I'm going to paint, following the corner, etc., etc. Using white, I paint a little dot on the orb, a little dot of reflection, and that finishes up those parts. Then it's onto the weapon, those weird tubes, I think, let's call them tubes, that are there. I start off with a mixture of 4 parts warlord purple and 1 part black, and quite simply I just block it in. Just make sure that color is on there. It's the grounding color, just from what we're gonna work. Next, using Druchii Violet, I wash all those parts to get a good shading in those recesses there. Once the Druchii Violet, difficult words, Druchii Violet is dry, I take Warlord Purple and I basically paint all the raised areas. It's perfectly okay if in the deepest center parts of those symbols, well, I don't mean the deep parts, but the raised areas, and then in the middle of it, if a little bit of the base color still is showing. In a little bit, when I continue a bit, you'll see what I mean, because we're going to build up the color towards all those edges, the upcoming stages. Next, I make a mixture of 2 parts Warlord Purple and 1 part Bone White, and I am going to basically edge highlight all these parts with a, well, really thick edge highlight. So again, I'm going to try to keep some of the previous color in the more middle parts of the raised areas visible, except for the little small round thingies, because that's nearly undoable. I then add 1 part Bone White to the mixture, making it a 1-to-1 mixture basically, and I reapply another edge highlight, a little bit thinner than the previous one, so that a little bit of transition starts to come to life on these parts. This is pretty time consuming, but in the end, the result, I think, looked really good. I then make a mixture of 1 part Warlord Purple, 1 part Bone White, and 1 part Dead White, and I go over this entire process once again. And even though the edge highlight still gets thinner, it's still thick enough to allow me to paint another edge highlight after this one. And the whole build-up effect, especially with this color, becomes really clear. So to finish all those parts off, I use white, and I paint a really thin but clearly visible edge highlight over all those parts. And as for those little circle thingies, I just hit it quickly on the top of them, and in case you do it a little bit too much, that's not gonna really be a big problem. So after that has been done, we're now largely through. I'm going back to the airbrush quickly to do some OSL. So I use some Warlord Purple and I paint the grill area and the surrounding area of it. And then I make a mixture of 1 part Warlord Purple against 1 part white. This is a roughly estimate. It might vary a little bit. And I just go, I take the grill and really close surrounding areas. And this is then followed by some pure white for the final coat. The little bar I cleaned up a little bit, as you can see afterwards. Then it was onto a dull coat for the entire model. So I took it out. Then using some Tamiya clear code X22, I glossed the barrels of the weapon. smartly enough, I forgot to record using gloss varnish on the orb part on the back of the weapon. However, once that's dry, I applied some mud stuff to the base because that gives a better atmosphere in my opinion for Necrons. This is the finished model. I hope you enjoyed and liked this tutorial. Please like, share, and subscribe if you want to. And leave a comment as well if you have any questions or requests. I'll do some more Necron videos in the future. I'm going to say thank you for watching, and I hope to see you next time. Bye bye.